recording. So why do we study intercultural communication? Why is it important? So what do you guys think? So like I said, feel free to pop in on Zoom, say something, or just if you're here in class, feel free to speak up. So why is it important? How do we use intercultural communication? Or how do you guys in particular use intercultural communication?
So we can better communicate with each other, different cultures, different people.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
So we can better communicate with each other, different cultures and different backgrounds.
Yeah, so we can better communicate with people from different backgrounds, from different cultures, from different countries. Because obviously, you know, we weren't raised the same way. So we technically have a different cultural background, even if it is just because, you know, I'm from the Midwest. Because regional cultures differ as well. If you're raised here in the Southwest, you probably have a different worldview than someone who's raised up in the Northeast.
I think it's also like so we can just understand, because a lot of it is like there's just a lot there's a lot of different cultures and a lot of different things that people do, and so we can learn to just have a better understanding of everything else.
Definitely. There are so many different cultures in the world. There's different languages, there's different religions, there's different ways people believe and think, that, you know, the more we can interact with different types of people, the more we can learn, the better we can become ourselves by learning from other people. You know, knowing other people and learning about them helps us get to know ourselves better as well. So the textbook that I use for the lectures that you guys don't need, it identifies 6 reasons to study intercultural communication. We'll talk about this here in lecture, and you guys have a reading in the reading section as well about this, but I think it's actually next week. So this is kind of a preview to what you will read next week. So there is the peace imperative. So peace meaning, you know, like war and peace. There's the economic imperative, so money. Technological imperative, so access to technology. The demographic imperative, so changing demographics, changing populations. The self-awareness imperative, so getting to know ourselves through knowing other people. And the ethical imperative. So we will go over these again, but if you want me, I'll wait a couple seconds if you want to finish writing them down. So the self-awareness imperative. So why is it important for us to understand our own cultural identity and others while studying this? Well, one, it's just kind of interesting to know where we come from, right? Like, what do we believe and why? Why do we think about the world in this particular way? So when you can learn that about yourself, you better know other people. When you can learn that about other people, you gain an understanding of why you might think one way about something. It's not saying that the way that you might think about the world is wrong, or that the way someone else is more right. It's just saying that people are raised differently and have different experiences. And it's helpful to learn about that so that we can understand the world around us. So it can help us learn and become aware about what kind of systems and institutions are around us and that we may be quote unquote caught up in that we don't really have control over, like the American political system. It's important to understand that, even though many of us, you know, we're not probably in politics, but it's still something that affects our daily life because it's a system that has come about from other people's experiences and other people's culture, because it's based on, you know, like the different Greek and Roman systems of government. So, the demographic imperative. So changing demographics. So the workforce that, you know, our parents and grandparents were in it looks very different than the workforce we're in now. Especially right now, a lot of people are doing virtual work. Like half of my teaching, you know, 14 of your classmates right now are virtual. What types of people do you work with? If you work with the mine, or if you go up to Morenci, there's a huge amount of different people from all over the world living up there in Morenci, like in this little tiny town in the middle of the Arizona desert. How did they come there? Like, why? They came there because of the mine, because of work, but that workplace is very different than, let's say Eastern Arizona College, very different demographics. But it can be very challenging because people might have accents that it's hard to understand if you're not used to listening to it. People might behave differently. There's different ways of greeting people. Like here in the US, we're really good about shaking hands and maybe bumping elbows now. But in some cultures, it's perfectly normal to hug someone that you may have never met for the first time, or give them a kiss on the cheek. For most of us, we'd probably be like, okay, that's a little too close for first meeting, right? But the populations of Hispanic, Asian, and American natives and people who are 2 or more races, that population is expected to triple by 2050. So that's particularly in the US. So what's the US gonna look like in 30 years? What kind of challenges are we gonna have to overcome in the workplace with cultural differences? Like a lot of Native Americans, they don't tend to make a lot of eye contact because that's just a part of their culture that's seen as more respectful. Same with a lot of Asian cultures. It's not respectful for you to make eye contact with me in a lot of Asian cultures. But here in American culture, if you avoid eye contact with me, then that's seen as like you're hiding something, right? Like if, your parents, they say, okay, well, look me in the eye when you're talking to me. So, in a workplace, if a boss thinks someone's being shifty because they're not meeting their eyes, is that a cultural difference or what? So even though we are becoming more diverse, it doesn't mean there has to really be conflict. Because, we all have friends who are different than us or who disagree with us on some topics, but that doesn't mean we're constantly like at each other's throats. You can still be friendly and polite and kind to people who share differing opinions than you. Maybe I don't like that, you drink pop or whatever. Maybe you don't like that I say pop instead of soda. Everyone makes fun of me for that because I'm from the Midwest. Sorry, it's pop, not soda. But that doesn't have to cause a conflict. It's like, okay, that's just a different word choice you use for that. Or calling that a poncho. I don't even know what the actual word for it is. I just know it as like a poncho. I'm sure there's a real term for it. But that doesn't mean we have to get into an argument over being like, no, it's a poncho, or no, it's a whatever the actual word for it is. And then especially with demographics in the workplace. So how can we make more money by using diversity? I guess to an extent, if you're looking at it from a business perspective. So the more people you have in an organization or an institution that have different experiences, you're able to think of better ideas, better products. So any of you guys speak Spanish? A little bit? Okay. So you might find this kind of funny then. Anyone who speaks Spanish might find this a little funny. So there was a car here in the US called the Nova. They marketed it in South America, but obviously Nova, no go. Do you really want a car that's called a no go? So you're kind of giggling. It's funny. Obviously that was a really, really bad marketing tactic. They probably lost a lot of money. They did not profit because they didn't think about that. They didn't have enough diversity in their organization to say, is it a good idea to market a car called a Nova, in South America? They didn't think that. But had they asked, I've been like, is this a good idea? Someone probably been like, no. Is intercultural conflict always a consequence of diversity? No, it can be. People are definitely really good at conflict. Humans will argue over anything. But it doesn't have to be a source of terrible conflict. Especially with the US becoming more and more diverse, we need to learn to get along with all different types of people. We don't have to always agree with them, obviously, because we all have our personal values and ethics and morals and ways we think of the world, but we should at least be able to say, okay, well, I don't maybe agree with you, but I want to understand where you come from, and I want to be able to work in harmony with you to get this stuff done that we need to get done, particularly in a workplace. And that kind of ties into the economic imperative. I kind of just like tied it together. Less that I have to talk, I guess. But we already talked about that. So how can companies benefit from cultural differences? Obviously, they can avoid marketing blunders like the no-go. But like I said, the more people you have of diverse backgrounds, the more ideas you can get. So, and especially with money and marketing, because I'm a communication person, I like to think about marketing sometimes. You have to know what people like in order to sell to them. So if I'm trying to market a product in the Middle East, I'm probably not going to use a half-naked woman to do it, because that's not what their culture says is okay to use in marketing. But American marketing, it does that all the time, because that's a norm here. That's normal. It's okay. But in other places, it's not. Or what kind of food are we marketing? I'm not going to market pork in the Middle East. I'm not going to market beef in India. Probably not going to market a lot of vegan stuff in rural Arizona. So you have to know who you're talking to in order to be able to sell to them. And that kind of leads to like globalization. So we're coming a more global world. Everyone's becoming more connected with each other. And therefore, we have to be able to talk to people from these different places. Because you might work in a place, like you might work at, okay, example, sun pumps. Down there in Safford, they sell like pool pumps and stuff. They're Arizona, they've been here like forever. I know some of their staff members, like it's very much Safford, Thatcher, Arizona. Like that's the culture there. But they have people from all over the world call for their pumps. So when someone answers the phone, they have to be able to communicate with someone in Jamaica and someone over in China and someone from, I guess, like the Tibet monastery over in like New Mexico or something. Apparently we have one of those, I guess. And they must have a pool or an irrigation system that needs pumps. But you have to be able to talk with different types of people in order to make your money. So you have to go in and say like, okay, this is what we need to do. This is how we talk to these type of people. And companies actually pay people to come in and train their employees on how to be cross-culturally competent. So if you're working for a company and they're going to send you over to China to do business, you might have someone come in and sit down with you and say, okay, here's the cultural norms. When you take someone's business card, you take it with both hands. You don't fold it or anything like that. It's customary to exchange small gifts. Make sure to always give and receive both hands. Here's some really basic Mandarin lessons and some really basic Cantonese. This is what the symbol for exit looks like. So in case you need to get out of somewhere, you know what the exit sign is. And then you have some experience so you don't like bungle a business deal or something. So far, is this like making sense about the different reasons why we might need to be interculturally competent? Yeah. Okay. So technological imperative, like pretty much all of us are like millennials, right? I think that's what the term for us is. Gen Z, millennials, Gen Z. We're used to technology, right? We grew up with it. But not everywhere in the world is as fortunate. So what does our technological skills and technology, what does it have to do with intercultural communication? Technology bridges divides. So, you know, you could have a friend living in Egypt that you message on Facebook. Maybe someone's best friend lives down in Mexico City. You know, we can't just go for a weekend, well, maybe. Okay, we can't just drive down in like one day and go hang out with them and drive back and come to class the next day. So we have to use technology to bridge that gap. It also helps us see like what's going on in the world. I don't remember if you guys, or I guess let me reword that. I don't know if you guys remember, what was it, like 2012 when all the riots were going on in Egypt? They like cut out the communications after a while. They did that, I think, in India too, last year, the year before, where they like literally like shut down the internet so information stopped getting out of those countries. And you're like, oh, I wonder what's going on. Oh, sad, it's a coup, or you know, people are getting the crap beat out of them in the streets. But you know, technology helped us see that that was happening. And then when that tech got cut off, it's like, well, what's going on there? You know, what's happening to my friend over in Egypt? You know, are they okay? Are they participating in these riots? But it helps us become closer to people. It's really hard to be prejudiced against people and be discriminatory when you actually know people from those cultures. So it's hard to hate entire groups once you've actually been, you know, exposed and talking to someone from that group, because it humanizes them. So it helps us become better people and be less stereotypical by saying, okay, well, not all, you know, punks are, you know, poor losers who just go around and annoy people all day. Or, you know, not all, you know, insert group here are, you know, terrible people. Or not all of this group are super great people or super smart, or insert whatever stereotype here you have about some group. So just information's a commodity. Information is important. Question? Yeah, so that's that digital divide. Because technology is a commodity, or information is a commodity, it's worth something. And places that don't have that, like if you're thinking of places that get cut off from the internet or just don't have the infrastructure, then they are definitely at a disadvantage of, you know, the rest of the world maybe not always being up to date on what's going on. Or like the 90s with the Rwandan genocide. Not a lot of information going in and out of Rwanda at that time until you had international news places and stuff going and being like, holy crap, this is a genocide, this is a slaughter. So you know, could we or should we have, you know, helped to build the infrastructure for the technology so that information could have got out? But yeah, the digital divide, we see that like here too, because like if you've ever driven through Vilas, you notice your cell service goes out for like huge stretches. You know, what about the students who live there on the res? You know, they might not have access to the same high-speed internet that we do. And if they go home, how are they supposed to do their homework or do their virtual work that they're trying to do? So, and then part of this technological imperative is how do we help get everyone equal access to this technology or get them better access? What can we do to make sure that the people in rural communities like out here have access to internet and have access to the technology that they need to do what they need to in the modern world? How do we get internet out to those other countries where their infrastructure might not be as great? So what can we do to help improve those people's lives? And so that if something happens, like a genocide or a coup, that the information gets out there quickly so that they can get the help that they need or get the humanitarian aid. Just, you know, like our electricity goes out and we're all just like, oh, I can't charge my phone, I can't charge my laptop, what am I supposed to do? But imagine, you know, getting hit by an earthquake and it being out for months at a time. Or having it and then a new government comes in and takes over and then you don't have access to the internet anymore to spread information. Technology is important. And so how do we how do we help other people get it, and share information. And then we have the peace imperative. So how can we maintain peace across the world? Most conflicts are actually not international. They're not between nations, because international war gets really, really messy, and then we drop nuclear bombs on places, or we invade. Luckily, we don't have too much of that anymore. We are living in an extremely peaceful era. I know it might not seem like that because you're like, well, we've been in Iraq and we've been in Afghanistan and we've been in like Kuwait, but compared to the rest of human history, we're doing pretty darn good. So most conflict is internal conflict. So it's different tribes and different subgroups fighting each other. So it's within nations that people are arguing. Like if we take the past couple months, for example, you have internal conflict of a lot of the left versus a lot of the right. I don't want to say a lot. You have a small minority versus a small minority. Vocal minorities, but minorities nonetheless. But that is internal conflict within a nation state rather than international conflict between like us and Canada. Which is good because it's, we're not dropping nuclear bombs on like, the Democrats or on the Republicans or anything. We're just, not being very nice. But we can coexist peacefully with other people. But conflict can arise from anything. We've seen a lot of conflict arise from cultural products like movies and stuff when we export cultural products. What is that movie? Like the North Korean one with curly-headed dude? The Interview, that's what it was. So that was an American export. It was an American movie. How did North Korea feel about that? Probably caused a lot of tension. Or if you have American movies, I'm just going to use like Hollywood, for example, because most of us know American movies. If we export those to places that are extremely religious conservative, like the Middle East or Saudi Arabia, and there's like a sex scene or something, or a topless woman, it causes tension because that's not part of their cultural norm. And it can be like, okay, well, why are these Americans trying to send in these movies and corrupt us with this stuff? Yeah, honestly, Hollywood is probably America's biggest export because you can go anywhere in the world and you can see American movies. So, but the more we learn about other groups, like I said, the more we don't stereotype them and the better we can avoid conflict. But people can always be born into or brought into conflicts that they don't want to be a part of. So, which is unfortunate. And then our ethical imperative. So do you guys think ethics are universal or relative? And by that, are ethics universal in that everyone should have or does have the same set of ethics? Or does it vary culture by culture? So what's acceptable in one culture is not acceptable in the other. So basically universalist versus relativist. What do you guys think? This is not a right or wrong answer. This is just two perspectives. Where do you think you fall? I'm going to say that I fall somewhat in the middle, but I lean towards more universalist because I think there are universal right and wrongs.
I think I also fall somewhere in the middle, but I think I actually fall a little closer to relativist. Big Yeet, can't speak today, but because there's a lot of how you were raised in a right or wrong. Like I grew up really religious and I no longer am. So there's things that I do now that if I was 16 looking at myself now, I would think I was a terrible human being. But I'm like, no, I am a really good human being. But it's just like the way that I was raised versus like my ethics now are completely different.
Definitely. Thoughts from anyone in here? Any more thoughts from anyone on Zoom? Okay. Maybe I'll ask again after I explain it, because some people might still be like, oh, unsure. So the way we can kind of look at this too, are there any cultural behaviors that are always right or always wrong? I mean, like I said, most of us are probably somewhat in the middle. Like there's probably no one in this class who's a very super strict relativist or a super strict universalist. Because I mean, but I guess it would depend on how you're raised and stuff. But a universalist would say most places have a similar set of beliefs. You know, like we're not going to kill people because that's wrong. You know, I'm not just going to walk up and like stab someone for fun, because that would be unethical. That would be wrong. You know, I'm not just going to go over and like steal all of someone's stuff because, you know, that would be wrong. And a lot of cultures would agree on some of those basic things according to this. So similarity of beliefs across cultures, saying we have more in common than we are apart. So main cultural differences might be only superficial, but that our fundamental notions of right and wrong tend to be universal. So like I said, this would say like, you know, it's wrong to kill. It's right to help out your neighbor. You know, it's wrong to just go beat the crap out of someone just because you can. And then a relativist would say that you can only judge an action based on the cultural context in which it occurs. And that only the actual members of the community could say, well, this is right or that's wrong. So some of the examples I like to use for this that tend to get people a little riled up. There are some cultures that it is okay for 12-year-old girls to marry 45-year-old men. Can we judge that in, you know, and say, well, that's just part of their culture, so therefore it's okay? Yeah, I know most of us women are probably being like, or if it's like a head hunting society and you have to go chop someone's head off to be considered a man. Can we only judge that within the context of which it occurs? And that's why most of us are probably like in the middle. But then again, like, is it fair to say that everyone is fundamentally the same? Probably not, because, you know, some people might say, you know, it is never okay to kill at all. Maybe that's part of their culture, but then you have to say, okay, well, is it okay in self-defense if you're protecting your family? If you're like, when does that end? Like, is it okay to kill to protect someone else or to protect your pet dog or what? So, and like I said, there is no like right or wrong answer to this. It's just, where do you personally fall on that? Because like I said, we're all raised differently. It's just, which one do you tend to be? And it can definitely change. Like when I was in college, I was definitely a relativist, like very pretty hard relativist. But you know, it's as you like learn more, you might change. So, but like I said, no right or wrong answer. So then, what skills are important in learning about our own cultural patterns and identities of ourselves and others? So how do we go about doing that? Well, we can be self-reflexive and think about ourselves and our actions. So, you know, next time you do something, you know, that might be considered cultural, ask yourself, you know, well, why do I do that? Why do I celebrate this particular holiday in that way? Like, is it, you know, just part of my culture? Is it part of my religion? Is it part of my individual family culture? Like, why do I do that? Oh, and be like, okay, well, that's where it came from. Now I know why I do that. So that's kind of cool. Learn about others and say, okay, well, how does your family practice, you know, insert whatever here, or what are some family traditions that you might have? And family traditions are a really, really easy way because people can kind of think off the top of their head and be like, okay, well, you know, we celebrate Hanukkah, or we celebrate Kwanzaa, or we celebrate Christmas, or Yule, or insert whatever other winter holiday there is. And then this says acquiring a sense of social justice. And please don't think of this in the way of like social justice as you're like out there with tickets like the extreme people tend to think of. Just think of this as, you know, being able to understand what's right and what's wrong. So just kind of to wrap up, so be conscious of your communication, be aware of other people's communication, expand your repertoire of intercultural communication, so be able to recognize different things and be able to try to put some of those into practice. Be flexible in your communication and be able to be an advocate for both others and yourself. Like if you don't think something's right, feel free to speak up and say, you know, I don't agree with you on something, or I don't like the way you're treating that person. So let's figure out what comes from that. So this is part of our discussion on Canvas. So can you guys think of a scene in a video or a video game or a song that deals with or shows intercultural communication? And you guys will post those clips into the discussion so that you guys can discuss and talk about it. So what are some of our questions from that? Any thoughts, any questions, any concerns?
So discussions, we post a video.
Yeah, so let me pull that up real quick. Yeah, so we have our, I think I stopped screen sharing. So we have our week 1 discussion. So you'll answer, so how globalization has impacted your life in particular. So maybe you found some really good Bollywood movies that you're just like, oh my gosh, I am in love with like Bollywood right now. There are some really cool ones. Like, have you seen the Bollywood dance scenes? Athleticism. We should watch them in class. Like someone should post that just because they're really cool. Do you personally consider yourself more of a relative or universalist, and just why? So like I said, I consider myself more of a universalist because I definitely think there are things that are right and wrong. You know, I think it's wrong for 12-year-old girls to be married to 45-year-old men. I think it's wrong to have to like get scarred or to hurt yourself or to have to hurt someone else to be considered a man in a culture. I think killing people and stuff is wrong. So that's why I fall on a more universalist thing. You don't have to get too like emotionally deep or anything, but just why you think you fall there.
I have a question.
What's up?
How long do you want our initial post to be?
I mean, long enough to answer the question, short enough to keep it interesting. Sorry, that's vague. Like, I'm thinking like a sentence or two for each question, maybe. So just long enough to get the point across. If it ends up being a little bit longer or a little bit shorter, then it's not a huge deal in my personal opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Has there ever been a time that you've broken a social norm or made a faux pas, like embarrassed yourself? What did you do to fix that if you needed to? Did others react in a positive or negative way? Did they laugh and then help you out, or did they just be like, what is this person trying to like do? And then find a clip and post it of a scene that deals with or shows some intercultural communication. And then we might take some time and watch a couple of those in class, but then you guys will also have a chance to watch all of them in the discussion. So what are our thoughts from there? And like I said, this video will be posted in case you missed it. Or did we get anyone else new into the... Oh, we got Alexis in. So, but do you guys have any closing questions before we wrap it up for today and meet again on Tuesday.
On number 3, you said, has the very time you've been broken a social norm.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't hear what your example was.
Oh, the example of broken social norm. So like, let me hold on. Okay, I do have the video on. So, so when I first got into college, we had a student from, I think he was from Argentina. And the first time I met him, of course, you go in as an American, you go in for a handshake or whatever. And, he takes the hand, but then he pulled me in and gave me like a kiss on the cheek. And that was probably like a social faux pas on his part because, we're in America and probably shouldn't be kissing girls that you don't know, especially on first meeting. So that would probably be that's definitely a breaking of a social norm. Okay. So if you ever broke one, or if you can think of a time where someone else broke one, or like if you've been on a mission somewhere else, and I'm sure we've all made awkward mistakes talking to people or whatever, or knocked on their door wrong. And like, I think there's places in South America, like where you don't do like a certain knock because it's like an invitation for someone to come sleep with you. I think I learned that from one of the other classes. Please don't choke on your drink. But yeah, stuff like that.
Would I be able to use like, because last year in my high school we had foreign exchange students and they just don't like eat some of the stuff we eat here, and like one of them had never had peanut butter and stuff, and so could I like just share how like the reaction and everything between eating our food and stuff, and like would that be something I could talk about? Or because it wasn't even like embarrassing or anything, it was just like a shock for us not to know that they haven't ate that stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm looking specifically for more of like I said, like a that's because that's not really like a social norm that they've broken. That's more of culture shock itself. So I don't know. One of it could be like if they were always like perpetually 5 minutes or 10 minutes late to class. That could be breaking a social norm because a lot of people from South America and like Pacific Island cultures, they have much more of a flexible view of time. So when things like start at a certain time, it's like, no, it doesn't start till like 10 or 15 after, it's fine. So that could be one of those things. So, but if that makes sense.
Yes, that does. Thank you.
Okay. So any other questions before we wrap it up? And you guys even got out a couple minutes early, like 30 minutes early. So
more like a comment, but like something that I was thinking of the whole time was just about like how just like the more you learn, you also like, especially with like yourself, it's like specifically learning about like your biases and stuff. And so like more on going to potentially leaning on the more like negative sides, but how those are really important to know just because there's something that you've just been taught. And so it's like, but they may not be right. And so it's like, then you can correct that.
Yeah, and we'll definitely talk more about like those stereotypes and unconscious biases later, but that is a big thing. So if you learn what kind of automatic stereotypes you have, like, oh, well, all people who are blonde are, the example of the dumb blonde, all the blonde people are dumb. We know that's, once we meet blonde people, we know that's not true and be like, okay, well, that's, that's a bias or that's a stereotype. Or, all people from this culture are super smart or like super uptight or insert whatever here. So yeah. Yep. We learn about our biases and then we can do things to adjust for them and be like, nope, that's our biased thought, not our actual thought. So we don't actually think this thing about that person. So, all right. Well, if there are no more thoughts or questions or comments, then you guys are free to head on out. Thank you for your time and attention. So, and this recording will be up hopefully pretty soon after class. So, cheers.
Sorry, I have one more question.
No worries.
So if we don't really, because I can't think of really any, so like a social norm or whatever for that question. What do you want us to do if we can't like think of anything for that?
Yeah, if you can't think of anything, just put that in the answer to say, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. And then just, if something pops up or whatever, or if someone else's post, just makes you remember something, just go ahead and add it in or whatever. But if you can't think of anything, then, you know, you can't force intercultural experiences upon you. So some people won't have anything to say. So it's okay.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Where do you find the recordings?
I will post them under the modules. It'll be videos week 1. So I will post those in there as I get them done. So like today, it'll go in there. So there just haven't been any videos yet to put in. So
Well, thank you very much.
yeah, no worries. See you guys next week.
All right, thank you.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thanks.